everybody. What is up? Welcome to the debut episode of Respawn. Hopefully, you heard the announcements of this episode. Hopefully, you listened to Prespawn, our little prelude to the show. You don't have to listen to it, just a little back information. But we are so excited for this episode. I'm Colby.
And I'm Derek.
And we talk Spawn sometimes.
We do talk Spawn sometimes, about once a month, in fact. At least that's the goal. Yes. So we'll see if we can maintain that. So I don't know about you, but this is the first time in my life that I have read the first 6 issues of Spawn with a critical eye as opposed to a nostalgic eye. I've talked about it a little bit, and I talked a little bit in pre-Spawn, but Spawn was all the rage when I was in 8th grade. So I think my first encounter with these issues was I borrowed them from my friend Matt when we were in 8th grade. So I have a lot of nostalgia tied up in these issues. Did you start Spawn with issue 1?
No. So, like I said, one of the Angela issues, or maybe it was Medieval Spawn or something with Angela, was one of the first comics I ever got. And so I actually started in these weird miniseries, and I think I mentioned this too on Pre-Spawn, but when I was younger, I would just buy whatever comics with covers of characters I liked. So I would just buy all these random Spawn issues, all this random stuff, and I inherited my cousin, when he was like 16, just gave me a bunch of comics from when he was younger, and so I just inherited like a ton of random Spawn issues. So I read a bunch of issues here and there, and up until I hadn't read them in order probably until I was like 17 or so.
Oh wow!
Like I had definitely read most of them. And that's why, like, rereading them here, I've reread the first 12 or so issues a few times for different things I've done. But I haven't read it. It's been like, I guess since the Vault collection came out, that's been like 2 years now. So it's been probably 2 years since I read the first 6 issues, but especially back to back.
Right. Well, I bought the first Humble Bundle last year, and I almost immediately read the first trade worth, again, purely for nostalgia reasons. So I've been reading these issues. I've read them twice in like less than a year's time. So they're pretty fresh for me. That was pretty good. That's pretty exciting. It's going to be interesting because we're going to hit weird pockets of Spawn that I've read.
Yeah.
But there's also going to be long stretches where this is going to be all new material to me. So this is going to be exciting.
So for those listening who haven't heard anything else we talked about, basic idea of this show, every episode we are talking about a different volume of Spawn Origins, starting, of course, with Origins Volume 1, going as far as we fucking want to now because there is shit tons of Spawn.
We're doing at least the first 300 issues.
But if there's interest, miniseries, spin-offs, movies, animated series, they're all up for grabs. But we're going to start here, see if you guys like it. We really hope you do, because I will say, it was really fun to actually do this, to read the first 6 issues back-to-back, to take notes, actually, like you said, reevaluate it with a more critical eye, and kind of try to, as much as I love and adore Spawn and love it to death, try to take away some of my love and bias and nostalgia and view it for what it is. And honestly, even doing that, I still had a blast with these 6 issues.
I did too, but I wanted to say what it is a comic by a 20-something creator who, for the first time in his life, has complete creative control of freedom over what he's doing. And oh my God, that is so obvious in these issues.
Oh yeah.
It's really easy to forget that Todd McFarlane wasn't yet 30 when he, when Spawn debuted. And that's, sitting here reading them now as a 38-year-old man and not a 12-year-old kid, that is so much more obvious, in a good way and in a bad way. There's definitely, these issues are more of a mixed bag than I remember. They're not all gems, but there's definitely something interesting about all of them. But you want to just hop right into issue 1?
So, issue 1. First of all, I want to say I forgot how fast issue 1 read.
Mm-hmm.
That was,
even with all the crazy captions, because man, those exposition reporters talk a lot.
That has continued to this day.
Oh, I don't doubt it.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of splash pages. My first thing that I noticed was, I've mentioned this before, I think, the exposition reporters are very Dark Knight Returns.
Yeah.
So are these opening couple of pages. The lightning cracks, the character just kind of appearing, standing on top of a church, the 9-panel grid structure that really opens the story. It's a very Dark Knight Returns Watchmen combo.
Yep. What I was shocked about, Sam and Twitch are in issue 1, and from issue 1, their dynamics actually really well established.
I have this as a note for later, but Sam and Twitch, honestly, are probably the best developed characters in these 6 issues.
Yeah.
He has a clear affinity for those two, but yeah, like you said, their dynamic, their characters are really well established as of issue 1. I'm pretty sure his Todd McFarlane's grasp of what cops actually do and how police actually work is total bullshit. But for TV cops, for comic book cops, for entertainment cops, they're cool. They're really, really neat. I'm just going to come right out up front. The very first issue of Spawn I ever read, Sam and Twitch play a pretty important role. So I've always kind of been a stealth Sam and Twitch fan. I read the Brian Bendis issues of the Sam and Twitch series, which I really enjoyed. So I will always say nice things about Sam and Twitch. But you're absolutely right. I'm going to 100% agree with you on that. They're pretty fantastically established, even as the first issue. I also wanted to point out in that double page splash where we have to tilt the comic, where we really see Spawn in full for the first time. Thigh pouches.
Hey, he's got to have every
90s character had to have thigh pouches.
They were ready. They were always. Although at this point in time, he didn't have any guns yet. We won't get those till, spoiler, the end of this novel. So
that's true.
That's interesting. I don't know what they were for. Hell wanted him to have pouches, though. That's apparently caught me off guard. We were talking off mic about this. The Youngblood reference very early on.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, and that makes a lot of sense because at the time, these were supposed to be superhero comics. They were establishing their own superhero universe, and the way superhero universes work is that they're connected. Valiant, when they came up, they were going very much out of their way to establish a conjoined universe, to the point where their first big crossover was to join their 2 timelines. Image wanted to make sure they had their superheroes as a cohesive universe. And I will say, I think the Youngblood references really work because on a more subconscious level, it makes more sense that a dude in a weird-ass costume with a big-ass cape is just wandering around. It makes more sense if there's a world where there are, already an established superhero team.
Yeah.
For people to be like, oh, is he one of those weird Youngbloods? As opposed to, what the shit is this dude in a mask and a cape doing hanging out in New York when there's no president?
I do remember, and we were just talking about this, but as a kid, because I did not read Youngbloods, didn't even know Youngbloods was a thing until much later in life, I completely thought they were someone that he was part of a gang.
Which is hilarious to me. I think that's so cute, man.
I was taken aback rereading it, because this is the past couple times I've reread these issues. It's the first time this dawned on me. Like, oh, they're talking about fucking a superhero team. Okay.
Yeah, Rob Liefeld's team.
Yeah, okay, never mind. That's not the gang at all, especially because the first time we see them, they're like kind of more scummy characters talking about who is that guy.
Yeah.
So I just assumed back then that's what it was. Turns out, no, that's not what it is. But it also shows that in a weird way, you don't have to know what they are for it to still make sense in some way.
Yeah. Narratively, it worked for you. I was there when the big, the Image neutron bomb dropped on comics. So I was well aware. Even though I to this day I could not tell you. I do not believe I have read a Youngblood comic, but I was aware of the concept even when I was reading Spawn issues.
Speaking of Youngblood, we're kind of serendipitous on this. Today is the 20th anniversary, the day we're recording this, of Image Comics.
Oh shit, that's fantastic. I didn't realize that.
Yes. 28 years ago in 1992. I saw that earlier today and wanted to double check and make sure that was from today. But yeah, no, it is. We are doing it on their anniversary. So, sorry, Youngbloods. We may have started with you guys, but we don't necessarily remember you as well as Spawn.
Definitely not. Well, there's not a continuing Youngblood comic going. Youngblood didn't just pass 300 issues.
Didn't they? And that's true. Didn't they? Was that? I can't remember when they brought Bloodstrike back. I want to say there were either talks or maybe they did bring Youngblood back for a little bit.
I think there was discussion. I don't think it ever actually happened. But then, there was and this is not going to be a Rob Liefeld bashing podcast. I'm sorry. I've actually, I don't hate Rob Liefeld. I used to. I don't. I'm in a couple of Facebook groups with him in there. He's a quirky guy. The thing about Youngblood is anytime Youngblood starts to get popular again, Rob Liefeld jumps in and says he wants to start doing it again, and then the project pretty much immediately grinds to a halt. So, but I think there was some announcement recently of, I think he got the rights back to some of them, but not others, like not any of the ones that anybody cares about, or I don't know. There's some weird ass Youngblood news recently, and kind of talks about new talks about some kind of Youngblood film or another adaptation of the property. Excuse me.
Oh, no problem. Actually, you're talking about different adaptations. One thing in this book that I didn't realize how this was handled, especially in this first volume, and it's a bit off kilter to get back on subject. I didn't realize, I had totally forgotten that a lot of this is like written from like first and second perspective.
Yeah.
And that threw me off a lot, like, you are doing this, your fault, you. And I was like, oh.
Yeah, and I'm kind of glad we get away from that. Is because second perspective is really hard to maintain.
Yeah, especially because the book
and
starts...
also the fact that it's interwoven with first person. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
off. No, I was going to say, yeah, that to me is the one big writing flaw I have, and I love Todd McFarlane to death. This is not, again, I think he's grown a ton as a writer, but because we are not introduced to Malebolgia or this idea for a little bit, and we have this before that happens, it does come off a bit like you're reading an adventure novel. It's like, am I Spawn?
Right, exactly. And we do get the final page splash is Malebolgia.
Yeah.
But we don't know who the hell it is or what's the hell is going on.
I don't think we get the name.
No idea what this dude's deal is.
We don't really get the name Malebolgia in this graphic novel at all.
Is it not in issue 4?
I maybe once. I'll have to double check, but I don't remember. I could have sworn, because even when they're having the big fight and Malebolgia's there, I don't think they say Malebolgia.
Okay, that's definitely possible.
I think that was still that may have been the time where he may have been debating whether he wanted that to be Satan or not.
Right, yeah.
And
not a lesser demon.
Yeah, they kind of, for a while, Malebolgia is treated as he is Satan, and then, of course, later on, there's a real Satan, but that's much later on.
Right. I never got to those issues, but you've definitely talked about them.
Yes.
I want to talk a little bit about, Grant Morrison in Super Gods talks about 90s comics and how you couldn't do a 90s comic without having an attempted rape scene in an alley that the hero stops. And holy crap, does McFarlane not disappoint?
Oh, yeah.
From that angle on a 90s comic. And I didn't realize it until looking through it now. We don't see the potential rape victim's face until the final panel of the scene.
That makes
everything
sense.
Everything we see of her is from behind, and that feels really weird and disconnected. And I don't think it's intentional. I think it's, like I said, a 20-some-odd-year-old drawing a book and focusing on the action, but it is just it's kind of a weird detail to notice that the one of two women in this comic, one is in a flashback, the other is a prop, and that's I don't know.
I will give a little bit of credit, though, because when we do really see her, the little bit of dialogue she does have, I think it's a very interesting scene to have her literally holding Spawn, like she's just completely freaking out. And especially for a first issue, to see this badass character in the first issue is literally like a blubbering, crying baby for a couple panels, just having to be held by someone he just saved.
Absolutely, yeah, I can definitely agree with that. And also, I find it interesting that other than the big splash page where Spawn jumps down to confront the guys, there's almost no backgrounds to any of this.
Yeah.
But the action is so kinetic, you actually don't notice that he's cheating the backgrounds pretty badly. Because, again, just the movement of characters across the page is really, really strong.
Yeah.
The panel composition is incredibly strong.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, the flow of motion to this book is one thing I was really impressed by. And, of course, because of Spider-Man, he had plenty of years of figuring out how to, in a very smart way, connect things. Also, how little the chains play in this first volume was also shocking me. I'd forgotten that, too.
To the point where it gets pointed out. It's actually it's lampshaded in the dialogue in issue 6. This also, issue 1, has one of my favorite worst pictures of Spawn. When he first screams no when the flashback hits in front of the potential rape victim.
Oh yeah.
And the mask is pulled all taut over his screaming mouth, even though it's covering his mouth, and his cute little pert nose is sticking out. McFarlane clearly did not know what Spawn looked like under that mask to start with. I don't think he exactly hadn't a design for Al Simmons yet.
Oh yeah.
Especially since we only see the burn face in Shadow this issue. I don't think he had a set idea. In fact, this goes back to something you and I kind of shouted out a little bit before the podcast. Not only did he not have a set idea of Al Simmons, I don't think he had a set idea of Al Simmons' race, because the character we eventually learned to be Wanda, she sure looks white, or at least incredibly light-skinned in a way that she is not when she is properly introduced.
Yeah, that is one thing that also caught me off guard, is seeing her for the first time. You know who it is, but she's drawn very differently. It's in a very specific, the first couple times are very like Sin City-esque kind of shots of her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
they're very
much so.
Very shadow, monochrome, kind of in the background. We don't know exactly what's going on.
And I would argue her jawline is set very differently in this first issue than it was when she's actually introduced. She looks like a different character. I think McFarlane really did not have this character designed when he put out the first issue, and then when he finally committed to a design for Wanda, it's actually a different woman when we finally meet her in issue 3. Spoilers.
Yeah, no, she. I kind of agree, because she's got a very much, it kind of looks like Gaiman's death a little bit in the...
oh, yeah, I can see that.
In the first bit here. But that kind of goes into, we were talking about, we kind of go, if you want to go into issue 2 a little bit too.
Yeah, I think we're about ready, because we've mentioned Spawn the Burn victim, we talked about Sam and Twitch, we mentioned the demon at the end who we don't know who that is yet. We can head into issue 2. My very first note for issue 2 was, I gotta get down to my notes for issue 2. Does it count as characterization if the character just talks too much? Because that's basically the Violator.
Yeah, we get the first like full on Violator with a giant page of dialogue for him,
which is all he ever does. The Violator, he talks way too goddamn much, dude.
Yes, I can kind of get that. He that definitely becomes kind of his character trope for a long time too, because there's so much about these first few issues, even just reading a couple of years ago, I had forgotten. Like, I forgot that we don't get to see much of him in the insect demon Violator form. Even when we do see him, it's mostly him doing very like attacking humans, or the one big fight ends up with him not being able to transform again.
Exactly. And then, speaking of, another thing that people like to point out as a negative about early Image Comics especially, is the how sparse they are of people. It's mostly splash pages, mostly cool character shots, because for the most part, it was more drawing for selling the pages later at an incredibly high rate as opposed to storytelling. And I feel like we get a lot of that here in the second issue. There's a lot of Spawn posing on crosses.
Yeah.
A lot of the Violator action actually takes place behind closed doors, and then you have like one goon running up and having his heart ripped out. Then you get a splash page with Violator, and then mix and repeat for most of the issue. You get a Sam and Twitch interlude, but it's an incredibly thin issue as far as story. Spawn throws a temper tantrum, Violator rips out hearts, and yet it's not a bad issue.
No, yeah. It's the first time Spawn really gets his name, which is kind of odd for a second issue, not the first issue, but it works. We had the first introduction of the church that would in way later stuff go on to be important.
I can believe that.
We get the introduction of Jason Wynn.
I think that goes back to start with, I think it's more just like a Frank Miller thing.
Yeah.
Because Frank Miller loves playing with crosses and having Daredevil on crosses. So the Miller influence is also pretty high in this issue as well. And you can see why McFarlane had Miller come on in a few issues' time, why he was, eager to do the Spawn Batman crossover. Dude is very clearly a Frank Miller fan.
Yeah.
As a lot of artists, coming up in the 90s, having seen what he did in the 70s and early 80s, would definitely be. But he's wearing his influences on his sleeve, especially with this issue. But it shocks me how little happens in this particular issue.
Yeah.
And yet it's so kinetic, and it's balanced so well between Spawn moralizing and just kind of doing the Silver Surfer thing of feeling sorry for himself, and then the kinetic stuff of the Violator pulling hearts out, it moves.
Oh yeah, it's a very fast moving one. We also in there we get the introduction of Jason Wynn.
Yep.
We get the we were talking about earlier, the white like him kind of being a white man fake out where he wants to put kind of his skin back on. He wants to look like himself again, and you have these couple panels of him transform into a blue-eyed, blonde-haired white dude, and him looking at his hands and being shocked and leading to like, "I'm a black man."
Yeah, that was actually. I got to jump the timeline a little bit and ask you: does this ever come up again? Is it because it feels like such a weird detail to include, and the only reason it's included is so that he can actually profess to be a black man, but it never actually. I don't feel like it ever goes anywhere that he can only transform into a white guy, other than. If you want to stretch and say it is part of Malebolgia's trick, is that when he does try to transform into someone, he transforms into somebody not himself.
That's definitely how it's played off. I'm trying to remember now because again, I didn't realize how weird my old school my Spawn timeline was. Cause I don't remember the first time he like transforms into himself.
Right.
Also,
McFarlane is having a horrible time drawing hands this issue.
Oh,
he's just having a rough time drawing hands.
God, I'm trying to remember when this happens. I don't, to the either credit or discredit, I don't remember it being a huge deal, but also I don't remember him being able to transform into himself for a while.
Right. Okay.
So I definitely think that's part of it because, once we get into volume 2 and 3 and 4, there's a lot of him kind of just in the costume.
Right.
And just kind of in this, or the costume being a different part of. There's a few different things, but again, I've learned that so much of what I thought happened in Volume 1 actually is like Volume 2 or 3.
Yeah, I think that's where a lot of the plot hits, which is why, again, these initial issues are really kind of fascinating because they are relatively thin, all things considered, but there's still, like you said, there's passion there, and I think that's why.
Oh yeah, that's one thing throughout these issues. The passion and the heart is there. The one
and just the excitement. Like I said, there's an unbridled level of I cannot believe I'm getting to do this on every single page.
Yeah, I don't think, especially in this issue. I mean, we'll probably wrap this issue up soon because there's not a ton to talk about in issue 2. It's just kind of you get to know a few more characters. You get to see the characters. You will learn a little bit more about Spawn, learn a little bit more about Violator, and kind of who is the person taking the hearts, him. And
right. Yeah, and I do like that McFarlane does a really good job connecting the heart attack killer with the actual scenes of Violator ripping out hearts, and then cutting back to Sam and Twitch trying to do an investigation, reading about it in the paper, being disgusted that they have to read about it in the paper. Again, like you said, the establishment of at least that there's a character who is Jason Wynn. We have an idea that he's involved in Al Simmons' death, and then we get. Again, just an entire splash page of the Violator bullshitting, for lack of a better term. But that final page turn where Violator actually transforms, we haven't actually been able to connect these two characters yet. We have not, until this moment, connected the clown to the Violator.
That's true.
So this weird, goofy midget that just, again, talks a lot of shit, actually turns into something horrible, and I think that's a really great end of issue splash.
Quick rewind. It does have one of my favorite weird splash pages where you have Spawn kind of internal monologuing and some exposition going on, and he doesn't even talk, just Violator waving in the corner at Spawn.
Yeah,
and it comes up later where he's like, "You were waving at me."
Yeah, doesn't even call it out in the dialogue. Why is this guy waving at me?
Yeah, he calls it out, and that's about it. But I've always loved that image of it's a different thing to do. You don't see a lot with just like a main character just waving down there without any dialogue or anything, like not even a hey kind of bubble.
Right. This is what's that guy doing? Waving, rather odd little man. Now what? He's disappeared in the shadows.
Yep.
Strange. Yeah. It's a good little moment. I will say I think it was a great final page splash, but I think it's kind of wasted when we get to issue 3 and we get the big splash of Spawn yelling Wanda's name, and we get back on that, and then we find out on page 2, oh, the little weird clown guy wandered off. I wish I could still talk to him. It's like, you set up a goddamn fight, man.
Yeah.
You're what the hell? Where's my payoff?
There's a... I will say this. It's hard to imagine reading this not in trade.
Yeah.
Because that's one thing I will say throughout reading. I was like, man, this reads really well back to back, because you do get those moments, but I don't know how it would read like back in the day where it's like, okay, wait a month to figure this part out.
At least because, all these Image books were plagued by horrific blown deadlines and just really came out whenever they wanted, to the point where in a couple of trades we're gonna have to talk a little bit about the ridiculous shipping schedule surrounding the issues in the early 20s.
Oh, fair point. Yeah. But like you mentioned, going to 3, we get we don't quite get that payoff for Violator stalking Spawn, but we do get the official name of Wanda Blake. We actually get a I think decently very very heartfelt scene of Al in the white skin confronting Wanda and talking to her. I will say the setup though, the ASPCA thing is very bizarre. Of like, want to make sure your dog's got a license.
Yeah, that was interesting. I gotta say, I can't. It's so weird to me that the 2 times we've seen Malebolgia so far, again, unnamed, but also he is introduced by his ridiculous laughing.
Yeah.
Both times. It's an interesting use of, again, panel composition, pulling the reader's eye down so that you're literally being pulled down into hell from a shot of the moon in the sky down into hell. It's interesting, but it's also like, this guy laughs a lot.
Yeah.
He has no real character. And for a demon, his threats are weirdly flaccid. I don't know, just going back and reading Malebolgia now, like, again, I can see why this worked when I was 12. Yeah. But Malebolgia's terrible at this point.
It's very bizarre. It's very odd. I do like... this issue kind of revolves around, you have stuff going on, but the heart of it is the meeting between Al and Terry, and finding out that Wanda has a kid with Terry, and Terry being, for those who have read, Al's old best friend. You get a cool, kind of interesting little meeting there. You get...
the one thing, it feels... I don't know... It feels a little exposition-y when they're talking about Al in the third person and their own relationship. They're really, really nice to this stranger that just passed out on their porch.
Yeah, but that is the one thing I will say. Yeah, that I was thinking too. Like, man, they're extremely nice, this person. But
I really love Wanda's introduction.
Yeah,
when she steps out, it's her splash page in that dress. She seems really sweet. She's gorgeous. McFarlane really does a tremendous job designing her visually. I'm trying to find a way to say, not just be like she's super sexy, but she's really well designed.
One thing I'll give his writing for here too is he does a very subtle thing that I think a lot of people wouldn't do, where I like that he instead of him just being pissed off at Terry and him just being super mad, he immediately jumps to like, well, they're happy together. I can't intrude on this happiness. I've been gone for 5 years. I've just learned I've been gone for 5 years.
Not just that, but when he sees Cyan for the first time, he part of the reason he passes out is because he realizes one of his own worst fears has come true.
Yeah,
they couldn't have a kid because he was impotent.
Yeah.
And that's, like you said, that's also an incredibly kind of weirdly sweet moment.
Yeah, and it's handled, again, for McFarlane, for all the shots people can take at him, there are moments of like this very heartfelt, like real, like I said, also talking about how a demon is tormenting him, tormenting him by showing him that, it was your fault you didn't have a kid, and this very, very personal attack that in a comic book like this, you kind of don't expect to see coming.
Right, exactly, and it's something. This comic has been around for such a long time. It's really easy to forget the impact of a story beat like that because it's been around for so long. We've known Spawn's deal for so long that it's easy to forget that's kind of big, especially for a comic coming out in 1992.
Yeah, it really is, and I mean. Again, we were just talking. The interesting thing about a lot of these issues is a lot of them have like one major story beat, and that's kind of what they revolve around because it ends on the cliffhanger of the Violator fight actually beginning.
Yeah, actually happening. But yeah, you're absolutely right. The first issue did a lot to establish Al Simmons, which actually I kind of wanted to go back to that. That's something I forgot to talk about. But in issue 1, we find out that Al Simmons is a covert assassin who makes the 10 sexiest men list, saved the president, and his funeral's national news. But I feel like a lot of that backstory falls by the wayside as McFarlane develops Al as a killer. It feels like overkill. It also, again,
he comes later.
Considering his character is black, it seems like kind of a very 20-something-year-old creator being like, when he mentions that Al met Wanda at the Republican National Convention.
Yeah, it's a very interesting. At the beginning, because again, you learn a lot of stuff. It kind of gets boiled down to he was a mercenary for the American government, of what in later issues it gets boiled down to. But at that moment, it is very much like he's the best of all time at this and 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 at this.
It feels a little bit of overkill characterization. Like he really wanted to establish that this was a hell of a dude who has been brought low by circumstance. Yeah. And again, not a bad idea, but I think his execution is very amateur in the plotting stage, I should say.
Also,
and I think it gets better, but again, there's just so much of the young, excited writer over so much of this.
Oh, yeah.
Having said that, going back to the issue we're on, issue 3, Spawn's temper tantrum in this issue, as opposed to a couple of the prior ones, I think is actually really well handled.
Yeah, no, it also makes total sense for the situation.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Not only is it logical, I think some of McFarlane's writing here actually resonates. Why are you torturing me? What kind of sadistic pleasure are you getting from this? You want my soul? Then come get it. Just try and get it. I was going to give it willingly. I just wanted my wife. Honestly, as a married dude, as a 38-year-old married dude, that actually resonates. I am empathizing with Al as a character more strongly this issue, and having seen, again, like you mentioned, his unwillingness to split apart a family for his own selfish needs.
I just realized, looking at the notes, this is also weird because so far, at least in the first volume, it literally goes big story beat, big action beat, big story beat, big action beat for the 6 issues. Because we get a lot of story in this issue, and next issue goes straight into the big fight with Violator, where they actually get the first kind of taste of a big drag down fight between Violator and Spawn.
Yeah, but also it ends on a pretty great cliffhanger. Violator rips out Spawn's heart, and he collapses, and then stands up in a double page spread, a giant chunk missing out of his chest, says, "Who said anything about being human?" That's, again, he's not Brian K. Vaughan, but his final page cliffhangers, at least 3 issues in, are pretty goddamn spot on. Yeah, no, it's true. They like to end on a cliffhanger, and even the ones that don't end on a straight up cliffhanger, we'll get to them. They end on he's very good at ending on a big moment. Yeah, and honestly, he's pretty good about starting on a big moment too, because one of the better lines of Spawn being a badass dialogue, which I'm going to say something about the fight dialogue here in a second, but let's try that again. But this time, try to do some real damage while Violator is holding his heart in his hand. Yeah. That is a pretty goddamn badass line. Yeah, McFarlane's not great at this, but when he's good at it, he's goddamn good at it. Yeah, there's some really cool stuff, and we have Violator, who all we've heard is talk this big talk, and now he's kind of scared and doesn't understand how it's possible for this person to have this much power, and he doesn't understand why, as he puts it, the bosses would give him this much power. And it's also introducing the idea of something I was totally forgot about, which is the fact of Malbolgia explaining it, but you see it in the fight of
Spawn having to limit his use of the power of the suit and the power he has.
Yeah, and I read about this in an interview, probably in Wizard magazine. They dropped the power bar eventually just because McFarlane literally realizes he doesn't have any idea of what he wants to do when the power runs out. So he just kind of makes that go. He just stops using it after a bit. So yeah, like I said, there's a long, drawn out discussion before the fight finally happens, but then when it does, it's a beautiful 2-page splash of Spawn blasting Violator, and then on the top panel, and Violator getting blasted on the bottom panel, along with a ridiculous amount of written exposition, which is when I realized, holy shit, McFarlane owes a huge debt to John Byrne as a writer.
Interesting.
I don't. This particular panel composition is very Byrne. He, as an artist, he definitely wears his Miller and Watchmen on his sleeve. But reading this fight, and actually just coincidentally, by total coincidence, I have been re-listening to the Wait What episodes of the Baxter Building, where they were doing what we're doing with Spawn, except for with Fantastic Four.
Yeah.
And I've been re-listening to their John Byrne issues, and hearing them talk about Byrne and Byrne's narration, and how Byrne can kind of override a story, I realized that's kind of who McFarlane is modeling his writing style on. Not necessarily the way he does the dialogue, but kind of in the amount, kind of in the verbosity, and especially, like I said, this is the page where it hit me. Unfortunately, my copy doesn't have page numbers, but again, it's the double-page spread. Top panel is Spawn blasting, bottom panel is Violator getting blasted, and then there's like a scroll with the force of Spawn's blast carves a hole through the Violator the size of a basketball. Fragments of bluish rotting chunks vomit themselves in a helter-skelter pattern. The brick walls now have got a mural of crimson gore. As the blood runs softly down the wall, Spawn is taken aback for a moment, not by the blood he has seen has spilled far too much, nor is it the force of his power. It is just simply that it even exists. How can he repair a dismembered heart? Why does he have such powers? When is all the madness going to end? Where does he go now that he has lost everything? The questions ricochet through his brain, and on and on and on and on and on. Right. And it's like that's Byrne. That is pure Byrne right there. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. I'm just saying, holy shit, that is so clearly an influence. Clearly to me an influence now.
That actually makes sense. But again, like, this is another issue where it's very interesting, like issue 2, where it's kind of a fight, and that's basically the issue. Like, you have Malebolgia talking a ton.
And like you get 3 or 4 pages of a really good fight, but then I don't know. I kind of feel like it's a little bit of a cheat when we get to the couple of pages where it's like we get a giant chomp sound effect, and then it's a page of sound effects with a couple of flying limbs, and it's like it's a good gag, but I wasn't wanting a gag at this point. I was really enjoying the fight.
A lot of Spawn is slow burn, and this is definitely like, hey, here's a taste of what you'll get a little bit later.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, I can absolutely buy that. It just kind of reminds me of, the whole thing about, when we talked about this a little bit on Pre-Spawn, McFarlane got his own Spider-Man title basically because he got sick and tired of David Michelini telling him to draw crowd scenes, because crowd scenes are hard. And, between the sparseness of the first couple of issues character-wise, and then, again, we've got this really good, I'm going to count, once we get through all the, literally 3 or 4 pages of smack talk, which can't blame him, you got 1, 2 as a double page spread, 3, 4, 5 pages of a 20-some-odd page comic dedicated to really a pretty decent fight scene, and then you get a gag page before you're introduced to Malebolgia, who may or may not be named or just called the boss at this point.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's just called the boss.
I think you are correct. Looking at it now, because I think just because I knew it was Malebolgia, it never really crossed my mind. We don't actually see him named as Malebolgia. You're right.
And I think, if I remember right, this could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure for a while there Todd McFarlane wasn't sure if he wanted that to be Satan or not. So it took a minute before he named Malebolgia, and then Malebolgia was going to become like, that is like the Satan of this world, and then eventually actually adding Satan. But, it's an interesting dynamic, and also having him be like, hey, you are family. That's what you are now. You're both of my kin. I made you both.
Right, but also, he uses too many words to say it, but I do think the idea of, well, if you burn your power up, then you become a soldier in my army that much faster, and Spawn is a special kind of soldier, which he gets into way more detail later, but I think it's kind of hinted at here. Or you can just sit around and let evil fester in the world. Either way, I win. That's actually a pretty good angle. I like that. But then he kind of almost immediately negates that by giving Spawn his arm, having Malebolgia give Spawn his arm back, because he doesn't want him to burn any more power than he's already used. It's like he literally just said burning power is good for you.
Yeah.
That feels a bit of a narrative cheat in a way that I just don't think McFarlane could really think of a better reason to give Spawn his arm back. So he just kind of has this plot.
Well, it's kind of
MacGuffin its way out.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting too, because if for those of you who are reading Spawn currently, that's kind of been reintroduced as an idea, because you had this ultra powerful Spawn, Al Simmons Spawn, who burned up, who used straight up godlike modes, and is now almost in a recovery period, and is kind of back to that. But it kind of makes a little sense. And it's kind of this weird bookend too, to be like at the beginning of almost his incubation stage before he knows what the power is. You could, even though it lasts for a long time, so for those of you who don't like the whole power stuff, there's a good while that's an issue for at least the next couple volumes, I want to say. But like you said, the angle of it actually is pretty interesting, and actually, one thing I like these issues, because they feel so small, this world, unlike a lot of superhero comics, especially at that time, I like how even though it's this worldwide threat, it still feels very personal and very regulated to this one city, or these two cities, this one area at this point in time.
Right. And especially right now, as we're coming into it, it is very much, and it almost feels weird to say this, but it's very much a character piece. We are learning about the character of Al Simmons and how he reacts to the sudden insanity that has been introduced into his world.
It's very interesting, because I just watched The Lighthouse, and it has...
I still haven't seen it yet. I'm so wanting to.
Well, it reminds me, because it's like the world is almost not as important as the characters, as the main, these are what we're focusing on. I also think that even though we've seen plenty of great stuff, we've seen the inverse recently with Hickman's X-Men, where he did a lot of work to build up this new world in X-Men.
Yeah, but Hickman, we've discussed this before. Hickman is almost entirely a plot-based writer, and if you can't get behind that, you're not going to enjoy Hickman books, period. That's just how he works.
It's true, and what I was going to say, it's an interesting inversion and comparison to see someone who is so character-driven that what I think I like about Spawn is he gets so well-defined. These characters, Sam and Twitch are the same way, Wanda the same way, we'll see some other characters very soon are the same way, that they get so well-defined in these first 6 issues that it almost doesn't matter about the world that's going around them. It almost doesn't matter what goes on forward in time. Kind of like I've been rewatching on all the Kevin Smith Views Universe movies too. It's the same thing like Jay and Silent Bob, where no matter where you put them, they're so well defined that you can put them wherever the fuck you want to put them, because you know how they're going to act.
Right.
And I kind of appreciate that.
I think that's a really interesting call, because these are such character-based books that the fact that issue 2 is essentially plotless doesn't really matter. The fact that it takes 2 issues of build-up to get to a fight scene that lasts 5 pages almost doesn't matter, because you're becoming more and more invested in who Al Simmons is and how he's reacting to, again, this batshit world around him. Also, I gotta say, you mentioned it before, but how Malebolgia actually ends up trapping Violator in clown form is actually a really funny couple of pages, and it's really well handled. Some of McFarlane's better dialogue. You have failed miserably. It is incompetence like you that make my battle against God so laborious. You, my erratic child, are being grounded. Those are really good lines. It's fun, and honestly, like I said, I'm not thrilled about the gag page of the arms flying. But I do like the comedy of these 2 pages, pulling the Violator back into his clown form. I do kind of wish Spawn had done something about it, because he just kind of lets Violator wander off. And it does seem like Spawn should have done something to shitty little clown guy.
Interesting thing I've noticed about myself is, when I read this, most of the characters I hear in the like animated series voice when I'm reading it.
Yeah.
But Violator, I straight up completely hear in the movie John Leguizamo stuff.
I was going to say, you hear him in John Leguizamo, because I do too.
I'm not ashamed to admit that there's a convention that we, at least I know Lance is going, I might be going, I think you're working, Fan Expo, Dallas.
Yeah, I'm working Fan Expo. Well, we should be debuting the 3rd issue of Space is Awful at Fan Expo.
And John Leguizamo is going to be there. And there's part of me that if I end up going, I feel like I'm going to be the only person that only wants a Spawn or John Wick thing signed. That's all I give a shit about.
I might have you take my Blu-ray of Spawn up to
if I go, that kind of entirely might be my plan, is a Spawn thing and a John Wick thing, and that's it. Because I love him as an actor. But that's like all, and mostly Spawn. That's all I give a shit about. Like,
yeah, absolutely. Well, he does a tremendous job in that movie. Actually, I want to talk to you a little bit about when we stop recording. I want to have an idea. I want to run by you.
Okay. Also,
remind me.
One thing I will say, speaking of the movie, even that movie had a lot of flaws. They actually are pretty faithful to the first few issues in a lot of ways.
They absolutely are. Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. And also. Weird random bit of trivia that I just realized last year and kind of adore. The actor that plays Cagliostro in that film played Merlin in the 1980 Excalibur film.
Oh.
And I kind of love the idea that that Cagliostro is actually Merlin from Excalibur in that movie, and it's actually Spawn as like some sort of weird ass sequel to Excalibur.
So that's the other thing about these issues I forgot about. The two characters, because I read them when I was a kid in such weird order, they always forget are not in these first 6 issues. Chapel and Cog, not in these first 6 issues.
Nope. And one of them was created by Neil Gaiman, which is so weird that McFarlane can still use one, but not the other notable character from that issue.
We'll get there.
We will definitely get there. Next Respawn, we're going to talk all about that.
Oh, yeah, we are. Speaking of notable characters, next issue, issue 5, we open up.
We should mention that Savage Dragon makes.
Appearance. Yeah, I wrote that down. Speaking of the connections to Image Comics, we literally get a Savage Dragon spotted on TV moment, and it's just this bizarre moment where it's like I forget I'm in the Image Comics world, and then all of a sudden, Savage Dragon's on TV.
Yep, that cop out of Chicago. Yep, the Dragon dude. Yeah.
And I will say it's the only time the Youngblood stuff done, but like Savage Dragon, and I know there's crossovers, I know there's stuff, but at the same time, the art and the style of the book is almost so different that even though this is a world full of demons and monsters, even on that screen on TV, it looks just a little out of place in a weird way.
I can buy that. Yeah, I can definitely. I understand where you're coming from on that. Didn't mean to step on your toes with issue 5 because issue 5 #problematic. Man, I've got a couple of takes on issue 5.
I'm curious because this is so. Rewind for the '90s and Image. This was one of their first, this was the first time Spawn handled a very visceral depiction of a villain.
It did. And okay, my very first note, and it's something that I wanted to bring up as a bit of high praise. I like McFarlane as an artist.
Yeah.
I do think he's a very talented artist. We've talked a lot about panel composition and stuff already on this show. One of my, honestly, so far the single best detail of McFarlane's art for me, going from the Spider-Man work into Spawn, is Billy Kincaid's eyes.
Yeah, I was about to say, his eye work in this is great. I'm also going to say, not to get too real world and date it too much, but so I will give him credit for, as horrible a person Billy Kincaid is, sad enough, we've seen recent examples of people and corruption not that far off. And it's kind of terrifying to read, because I remember the first few times I read Spirit, it's like, oh, look at this. That's how I know people like this, that's horrible, but especially with I don't want to say certain names because I don't want to equate, but certain things in the real world where it's like, oh, this whole senator cover-up thing's not that far off.
Yeah, not at all. No, it's terrifying. Yeah. Okay. I got to point out one thing I hate about the art, though. Now that I've said something I love about the art, I think it's kind of funny that he lampshades the growth on Billy Kincaid's face being so unflattering, because that little weird chin strap that he has is just gross as hell, and I feel like McFarlane can't make it work in the art. It just doesn't work for me at all.
I kind of wonder if that was his attempt at just making him completely gross.
Right, I can see that.
Adding another layer of like this, like a weird. This is by far the most plot heavy issue in this first 6 issues.
By far. Can we put a pause on this for just a second? My dogs are barking at something.
No problem.
I'm going to go see what they're doing. Hold on 1 second, man.
Okay. So yeah, we're back from a quick break.
Yeah, like I said, my dogs were barking at something, and my wife's not home to check it out, so I had to go see what was up. You were saying that this is definitely the most plot-heavy we've seen so far, and I absolutely agree. I'm just... Okay, so I want to talk a little bit, because it's really only a little bit to talk about. 2 things. One... 2 days later is not nearly long enough for Billy to be back behind the wheel of an ice cream truck, murdering people. It's just, I feel like the time frame is just way too quick of a turnaround.
He gets back on it immediately.
Yeah. And then 2, the thing that more than anything else that bothers me weirdly, when I was a kid, the finger painting panel just really squeaked me out.
I was about to say. For as weird as the story can be, there's some of his best art in this volume in this issue. Todd McFarlane, how he draws kids, like the roundness and like the just kinetic motion he draws kids with is incredible.
Oh, absolutely. But I wanted to say and I'm just going to read from my notes here. The makeup and hair on Kincaid doesn't work. When he's like dressed as like a mother figure or something while finger painting. Yeah. Feels like overkill. Like it's taking a disturbing scene and pushing it into parody. It's B-movie serial killing using cross-dressing and gender identity issues as a shortcut story point for deviancy. It feels like a weird misstep. Like it's a bridge too far.
I agree. I always took it as him, especially when we see his talk, that it's him, him letting out his like inner child and trying to just completely become a kid.
Yeah, exactly, and that's how otherwise the narration acts.
But like how he talks about the kid, that almost it does feel like he kind of either generalist or very fluid and going back and forth. How he talks, he's constantly talking about going back and forth between male and female. And I kind of think it was McFarlane's attempt at talking about something like that, but maybe from a point in time when that in society was very, very far from the norm and very unknown for a lot of people.
It's a quick shortcut code for deviancy. Yeah. That he doesn't try. At least he doesn't try hard enough to take it any further than that. It's kind of like, again, somebody pointed out recently that the Alpha Flight issue where Northstar comes out that Scott Lobdell wrote, it kind of feels like it's coming from a point where the issue's trying to argue that being gay is okay, but also doesn't actually believe that because it's the 90s and being, casually homophobic is pretty standard. And again, it's like, sure, there may be an underlying attempt at saying something about gender fluidity on that McFarlane's trying to get to, but on the surface, it doesn't feel that at all.
I kind of wonder, and this we'll get more into like Billy Kincaid's past and stuff soon. Because, spoiler, he's dead, but he comes back.
Exactly.
Sorry for people who have first time reading this. It's 30 years old. You'll be okay.
Right.
But I've always figured it's kind of as being a very fucked up childhood, very, very demented, kind of like what is it? One of the Insidious 2 or 3, whatever. It talks about the backstory of the bride in the black veil and all that stuff.
That was 2.
Was it 2? Yeah, where it's like, it was a very abused boy that was forced to be a girl and forced to become like the daughter that the mother wanted.
Right.
I've always associated that kind of same kind of psycho torment with Billy. And
I kind of wonder. But what we're seeing on the page in issue 5 isn't that, at least not yet. And I feel like that's a misstep.
That's kind of how I've always taken it, though. So I don't know. I mean, I can see where you're kind of thinking where you're coming is fair, but I also think that's where it also comes back to. It's hard to know. It's not clear enough one way or another, so I can't say either of us are like, this is 100% what's going on. Because you are right. We get it's just one, because the only image
Right.
That I can think of.
And that's the other thing, is it's the only time we see him do that.
Yeah.
That, and also, again, I'm trying not to harp on it, but I think it continues to be worth pointing out. McFarlane is very much an amateur, being let loose to do literally anything he wants. So I think that at that moment and that idea could have shaped up better under a stronger editor. But none of these guys were getting edited in any way, shape, or form at this point in their creation. So again, it just comes off as a misstep as opposed to whatever he might have been trying to do. Now, there are some things he attempts to do in this book that are phenomenal. There's an interlude page where Wanda puts Cyan to bed, and there's a mirror image of Spawn in a lower panel where Cyan is being tucked in with her Felix the cat and Cerebus the Aardvark dolls. Where Spawn is napping amongst the garbage in the alley, and it's a really wonderful juxtaposition, beautifully handled on the page.
We get we get the introduction of the alley officially.
Yes, and that was actually something, again, I wanted to touch on. And again, I'm just going to crib directly from my notes because I feel like I made a pretty decent point in writing here. And I know it sounds different when I read notes. That's why I want to call that out. Having said that stuff about Billy, this issue also introduces the alleyway denizens, and immediately McFarlane shows a genuine empathy and sympathy for them. Also, like Kevin Eastman, he has a real talent for capturing the gross, seedy back alleys of late 80s, early 90s New York.
Yeah, he does something extremely well with, like, talk about the, like, subtle cop corruption of just not giving a shit about the homeless people and just running over a dude without even giving a complete fuck if they're homeless.
Right, exactly. And then their outrage at being, having even their basic human dignity taken from them.
I love
it's a really powerful page.
Well, how the panel's handled too is so well, where it's like the cops just going through acting like nothing happened, and the panel just cuts over and you see like just the bloody feet in the air, basically. Yeah, and it's like they didn't stop to look; they hit something, they didn't even care.
Yeah,
like that's a great little moment. Yeah, we get from the alley, we get a couple of the homeless people just. Like you said, really, really, like, we've had enough. You kind of get the beginning of, this is horrible. We can't be treated like we're complete rats just because we're homeless.
Yeah.
You also get the utter corruption from the cops to the senators and everything kind of that becomes way bigger deals later in Spawn. You get the seeds of that planted.
And it also, again, it's something Spawn himself points out. Hey, I have a mission. I actually have something I can do here.
Yeah.
For myself and for Wanda and her kid, that it finally gives him a purpose, which he has absolutely lacked for 4 issues. Which, looking back, it's kind of astonishing that we get basically 4 issues of McFarlane trying to find his own way in the book, just as Spawn's trying to find his own way in the New World.
Yeah.
But then we get kind of a take on a classic supervillain setup. I mean, we get introduced to a villain. We have our hero dispatched of him, even though he is dispatched of in a much more grisly fashion because, again, 90s an image.
I just realized that on looking through the book, that Billy wearing the wig, that he scalped her.
Oh.
I just got that.
I never put that together. I still hadn't. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, because he's got the same blonde hair and the same bow in the same place.
Oh. And it explains why it's fitting so weird.
Yeah, I totally just saw it. I was flipping through the pages and I just got that. Just dawned on me.
Oh, wow. Okay, that actually does add another level to it that I was not. Okay, I don't think that disproves my point.
No,
that does add another interesting wrinkle to it for sure.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it doesn't sway it one way or another, but it definitely adds more eye for detail for McFarlane on that than I thought.
Yeah, sure.
That's actually a really creepy, cool detail. Sorry.
Yeah, totally. No, I agree.
That's actually kind of just blew me away. I don't know how many times I've read these issues, and to see that pop back up, it's like, wow. And speaking of that, though, speaking of interlude stuff, I kind of tying the Cyan stuff too there. I love where it's talking about he could go after anyone and having just Cyan cut in between that too.
Yeah. Also, we've already spent a lot of this podcast, and we're going to spend a lot of this podcast talking about how badass Sam and Twitch are.
Yeah.
But this issue in particular, I think, absolutely solidifies them, takes them from, these are fun characters that I'm enjoying, seeing the exploits of in between the stories, to, these guys are actually pretty badass.
Yeah, that line.
They're keeping their own surveillance on Kincaid. Twitch mentions his 7 kids for the first time. There's a ton of really good, again, character work done for these 2 dudes. I honestly, Sam and Twitch are probably my favorite characters of the series, and it's going to take a lot to dethrone them from that.
Yeah, no, that line of them talking back and forth, and where he says, we can't legally do this, we can't do anything, but there's nothing stopping 2 people from just going out at night and 2 pals hanging out at this specific town who just happens to be where he went back to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just two buds hanging out every night, having dinner, chatting, and it just so happens to be in front of this house. There's nothing wrong with that. And, Twitch is amazing. I fucking love Twitch. And we're going to get to the issue where I fall in love with Twitch, I think in volume 4, so. Well,
it's so good. Like, they're back and forth of Sam kind of coming off almost like he's just belittling Twitch, and Twitch always having this really smart aleck comeback. It's a great touch, and how subtle it is, too. Like, it's crazy how many times I've said subtle for a book that does not ever get talked about as being subtle at all.
Yeah, that's because so much of it's not. But, the relationship between these 2 guys is pretty brilliant. It's solid as fuck. And again, I think it makes a really wonderful. It's definitely not the spine of the book, but it might be the heart.
I think the one thing about the Billy stuff that for me is somewhat forgiven in a creepy way is how he abducts the girl. I'm talking about is possibly the most real world creepy way that seems completely realistic.
It does, but there's always a line of dialogue from that scene that's really bothered me just because, I don't know, again, it feels like a little bit overriding, because he comes off, he's got the syrupy sweet, he's being really creepy, and then the sure, take all you want, get the best flavor. That's just, that to me feels like a little too much.
All right,
I just think it's McFarlane being, again, and this is something I keep bringing up in this podcast, just being kind of an amateur writer and kind of overselling the point. I think you could have gone straight from so pretty you get a free popsicle, go inside the truck and get your favorite, to Billy doing the counting with the finger painting, and I think it would have actually been stronger and more sinister than an almost Greg Capullo panel of Billy looking over his shoulder and overselling the scene.
That's true. Yeah, it's an interesting one because it's his first attempt at something that would become more of a commonality later on to Spawn of a very real world kind of scary level of real world issue dealt into a very fantastic superhero book.
Oh, I know he's gonna. I don't remember the exact issue number. I think it's somewhere in the 20s or very early 30s. He deals with Child Abuse again, and I know that issue has always kind of been looked down upon by Spawn readers as a little over the top. I've never actually read it, but I remember the cover pretty clearly.
Yeah, he has a run that's like in the same run where he deals with KKK, deals with that, deals with some more racial injustice, and there's a run of like late 20s, early 30s of Spawn dealing with some major issues.
Interesting. I didn't realize it got that far.
Yeah, no, it does. It's also interesting that this issue ends on such a big note of the first time we see Spawn just brutally killing somebody.
The brutality of the final page. Before we get to that, though, I do have a minor art complaint. I don't think McFarlane ever really settles on what Billy Kincaid's face looks like other than fat. Because if you actually look at it from panel to panel, page to page, there's no real consistency to features. His chin changes sizes, his nose changes sizes.
Well, again, I think he focused on the chin strap and the eyes, and that was his signifier, and everything else is just like. But also,
everything else is just he's a fat dude.
That, or maybe in his head he was so fat that all the blubber moved around so much it kind of erased the facial features.
That's horrifying, dude. because that doesn't really happen with Sam, who is also a larger character.
True.
Sam does get some weird chin action sometimes.
Yeah.
He has a very distinctive nose and a very distinctive haircut that I think helps McFarlane kind of keep track of what his character looks like. I wonder if it's just because he didn't plan to have Billy Kincaid stick around for more than an issue. He didn't dedicate a lot of time to designing the look of the character, which is fascinating because Billy Kincaid is ultimately the season villain for season 1 of the show.
Yeah.
where he gets a lot more depth and even creepier.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, he comes back in, I can't remember what issue. It's soon. It'll be next volume he comes back. But
I want to say it's issue 8.
But in the, like, right in the show, there's a lot of him hunting kids, a lot of him killing, a lot of him being in shadows.
I don't think he's actually out of prison in the first season, though. I think it actually makes it so that he's never actually been caught. I'd have to go back and rewatch. It's been a long time.
Yeah, it's been a long time, too.
But to get back to what you're saying about this one's final page splash, again, just a bit of nostalgia. My best friend Matt loved this page when we were kids. He thought it was horrifying and hilarious. The idea that there's an ice cream scoop sticking out of this dude's nipple, with the rest of the popsicle sticks.
Like, there's a lot of just really nice, horrific touches in the final panel of that.
Yeah,
like it's kind of you can tell how much fun he had just being like, this is going to be his death scene.
Yeah,
where
and the whole issue builds up to this moment.
Yeah. Also, you mentioned Frank Miller, like also being I feel like the most Frank Miller lit page with the most Frank Miller line of boy scream and girl scream. So I made him scream and scream
and scream. Yeah, the chiaroscuro on Sam framed in the doorway, and then the lighting on Kincaid with the chains. Yeah, it is such a Frank Miller page for sure.
And next issue, we get the introduction of my least favorite Spawn villain of all time.
Really?
Yeah.
I love Overkill. That's my first note. Is I love Overkill. It's because he was the first Spawn villain I was introduced to.
That's fair. He just comes off as so superhero villain after we just had Billy Kincaid, we had Violet with the demonic stuff, and then comes like someone that easily could be a Wildcat or Youngblood villain.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that might be why I like him so much, because his whole deal is overkill, to the point where we get an overkill explanation on his name. Like, his name is Overkill. In whispered voices, some call him Overkill.
That is a good line.
Because he has a tendency to go beyond his necessary means. What the fuck? What the hell does that even mean? By the way, I love Overkill. This issue to me is the first real swing and a miss. I think part 1 of whatever this story is, Payback Part 1, I think this is a garbage issue.
I was going to say this is my least favorite issue of the bunch. I think this is the first one where it just feels almost like a filler of waiting to get to the next important story.
Well, it's the first one for me that I feel like he doesn't. So far, he's done a really interesting, not always successful, but an interesting job of balancing the drama and the comedy. And I feel like the goofy shit in this issue is just too much.
And I've never understood. I could be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure I'm right because he has such a weird origin. Because wasn't he the character that McFarlane and Liefeld made on that Stan Lee episode?
Like the precursor to Overkill was, that's who that is.
Well, I mean, I'm pretty sure they even named him Overkill.
I'm pretty sure they did, yeah.
I know Liefeld has credit.
It's like an upgraded design, though.
I'm sure, yeah. Because I know Liefeld has credit for creating him.
Yeah.
I don't know. He's just. I think it's maybe I don't like him because I blame this issue overall. Because later, and there are Spawn issues later on where Overkill is involved way later that I kind of like him. But
again, I'm gonna gush on issue 23 when we get there.
Yeah, so. I mean, like he definitely gets much better later on. But at least in the first 15 issues or so, he's by far my least favorite villain.
That's fair. That's absolutely fair. My least favorite villain are these shitty fucking gunsels who shoot the cocaine addicted, like. Not homeless dude, but just cocaine addicted informant. Followed closely by the introduction of, and again doesn't get a name, Antonio Twistelli here. Just not really well handled. Also, I know it's not this issue, but I can't get over the fact that his nickname is Dracula because he sucks the power out of people, and that is probably my least favorite line in all of the Spawn that I've read. We'll talk about. I think it's next issue. We'll talk about it, but
That always reminds like the Spider-Man animated series where Morbius couldn't show him drinking blood, so he drank plasma.
Yeah, plasma. I must have plasma. Oh, yeah, that was garbage.
Which is so much, to me, on one hand, it's so much dumber, but also, if you actually drink plasma, it sounds so much creepier and weirder.
Yeah, it is. It is definitely weirder.
It's not like to the point of like Batman animated series where Joker couldn't just straight up shoot people, so they had to do the laughing gas, which made it look so much creepier.
Oh yeah. The episode where they adapted Laughing Fish, and then they actually gassed the lawyer dude and gassed the chubby guy wearing the Batman mask. Those were terrifying. But talking about Spawn, the gag where Spawn takes out one of the two guys that's shooting homeless people. Then we get the little kid as one of the mob bosses, and then Overkill breaks through the door in the shape of Overkill, and
I do kind of like that part.
It's not terrible, but it's one gag on top of another on top of another. Well, like 3 pages of gags, and it's like.
I think that is my ultimate issue, where we've had 5 pages that are kind of darker, sad, chaotic, nihilistic issues with like demons, both real world and afterlife kind, and like real world monsters. We get Billy Kincaid, get Violet, get Malbolgia, get these nasty, gnarly and stuff. And so when you jump here, it's like you just, especially when the last issue ends with this horrific death scene after you've seen this man mutilate a little girl and heard about how he did to 27 other girls and boys, and and then you've heard Spawn is having this very internal conflict of, do I tell my wife who I love dearly that I'm alive and risk ruining her happy life, or do I be selfish and get my love back? And then this issue is literally like you said, dude jumping through window, leaving a mark of himself. He's losing arms, but he's a enhanced cyborg, and Spawn's like, I've fought cyborgs before.
I do like the panel of him pulling his own arm off, though.
I like it.
That's a pretty cool, well-drawn moment.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, and then also the whole thing about how, now that Spawn's worried about using his power, he just lets his ass get kicked because he's too afraid to do anything about it.
Yeah, which I go back and you end on him getting guns, which is...
It's actually really cool.
It's really cool.
That's a great page. It's also a good character moment for him because he's like, I didn't used to have powers. Why have I been relying on powers? Yeah.
There's also the one cool thing about this, because in current Spawn, we're at that state again where he's trying to rebuild powers after killing Violator and whatever the evil angel person. But we're back to that point, and it calls back to this where he breaks in and gets more guns, and it has a moment like that again. And there's actually a really cool thing where he's talking to Mob Boss, and Mob Boss sees it. Spoiler for 2 years from now, Spawn, and our books, or 3 years even. But there's a great moment where the guy's pointing down, like, it's like he's like, should I really be that scared? It looks like you're carrying weapons again. That can't be a good sign for you. And it's just a really cool little callback.
Nice. That is actually pretty cool.
Here. That part I like. It's just, I feel like jumping from super, like, almost not quite that level, but like dark, demented, like Crow type of storytelling to straight up Wildcats.
Yeah, it is by far the most superhero issue of the book we've read so far, and thereby the most tonally off. It doesn't quite work compared to the other issues we've read so far. And
because even then, when you go back, of course, I won't spoil what happens next, but coming up, you go. If I remember right, in Volume 3, we're going to go from the finale of this, and then right back into demonic Billy Kincaid stuff.
Yeah, that's because I'm pretty sure Alan Moore is the first guest writer.
Yeah,
and he does the Billy Kincaid in Hell issue, which we'll definitely talk about next month. So I think that does it for this volume.
I just realized, not to jump too far ahead, next month, I fucking love talking about this volume. Next volume has some of my favorite Spawn issues of all time in it.
Totally fair. There's absolutely a reason for that to be the case. Yeah. But speaking of this volume, how would you rate this volume? How would you rate the first 6 issues of Spawn? What are your thoughts as kind of the collection overall?
The collection overall, I think it's very interesting because I will say, in a lot of ways, what you associate with Spawn isn't all here yet. It's a lot of character building in a very good way. There's a lot of character building and a lot of the important the important places in Spawn's life, the alley, the church, Malbolgia, Violator, Wanda, Billy, a lot of Jason Wynn, a lot of that is set up. But
Sam and Twitch.
It's Sam and Twitch. It's just you get a small taste of what I did not remember how small a taste you get of the overall world of Spawn in this, and I feel like knowing, because I'm much more familiar and remember much more of the next couple issues. What's coming up quickly is more of what you associate with Spawn in your head.
Right. That is absolutely true. Yeah. Like I said, reading through these with for the first time, really going through them with a critical eye and not just a nostalgic enjoyment eye, I think the cracks are a lot more visible this time through. I think it's a lot more obvious that McFarlane was a journeyman writer and was also way more excited about what he got to draw than what he was getting to write.
Yeah.
But I think these issues hold up surprisingly well.
I would say
28 years later.
I would say I would put it in the same way that I put I put like Nine Inch Nails' Pretty Hate Machine, where there are definitely moments that feel very dated due to where Trent Reznor was, where McFarlane was, of sound, of look, design, storytelling. But there's so much heart in it, and you can tell that there's going to be great things that come out of it.
Mm-hmm.
That alone, I think, makes it. If you've never read the issues, read them, because it's also a very unique time where to see the last time a modern phenomenon in superhero comics truly took over.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you say of this batch? Which was your favorite issue? We've established that we both think that issue 6 is the weakest of the batch.
Yeah.
What would you think is the strongest?
Honestly, I think overall, man, that's kind of a hard one actually. Overall, either 3 or 5, because I think that they're both. I think 3 has the most heartwarming moments and has the best written moments.
Mm-hmm.
I think 5 has some of the best visuals, and even though there's definitely some problematic stuff with Billy, I think there's also some. I think the horror of issue 5 hits a lot harder than any other issue in this volume.
It definitely does, and also, like I said, as a big fan of Sam and Twitch, I think the Sam and Twitch moments in issue 5, are
true.
Easily the strongest in the volume.
I think Sam and Twitch actually might be the MVP of this volume, all around.
Oh, of course, yeah, 100%, absolutely. As great as a job as McFarlane does, really, creating and fleshing out Al Simmons, and again, it does seem kind of obvious now that the creation and fleshing out of Al Simmons was something that was happening on an issue-by-issue basis. It does feel like he had a pretty solid idea, pretty much set in stone of who Sam and Twitch were from the beginning, and just continues to beat that drum. Weirdly, if I had to pick a favorite issue, it would either be the first issue, which I think is an incredibly strong debut issue, or again, weirdly, issue 4. I really like the Violator fight. It's good. Dumb comics fun that we've been building to for 4 issues, and while I don't think every gag works, I think the initial confrontation between Spawn and Violator is great, and I think the Violator being trapped in his clown form, I think, is really well handled, and actually some of McFarlane's better dialogue there.
One thing I think a lot of people, like up and coming comic writers, that can take away from, especially issue 1, because my biggest problem nowadays, where I see from a lot of Image books, a lot of Dark Horse books, their first issue, they try to pack so much into the first issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one thing, even though there's those 2 pages of exposition heavy stuff with the reporters, overall, like I said, we don't even really truly get his name. We can guess from the cover, but we don't really get his name. We don't really get much about Wanda. We don't really get much about anything. But you still get a sense of the character, and I think it's a good example of a lot of times in a debut issue, less can be a lot more.
Yeah, it definitely teases out the mystery well. And again, for a book that was intentionally mainly sold on its art. I mean, Image was named Image for a reason. Oh, yeah. They were a bunch of artists who were creating their company.
We didn't talk about that Violator half time is wearing an Image comic shirt.
Yeah, that's true. Again, most of issue 4, he's wearing the Image eye on his shirt, which is an adorable shout out.
Yeah.
But yeah, for a book that was marketed on its art, there's some surprisingly deep character work and more than occasional solid bits of writing.
We just talked about it. Everything. Honestly, everything between Wanda and Al is shockingly good.
Again, I think when you bring Terry into it, that scene gets a little overwritten. But
a little bit, but
it can't help it.
The core, especially the core concept and the ideas of what's going on there.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And then again, Al's reaction afterwards is some of the strongest dialogue work that McFarlane did for Al.
A thing I'll actually give the comic over the animated series or movie about is the animated series and movie both play a bigger thing about him being mad about Terry.
Right.
And feeling betrayed. And this has a much more real thing on it of him realizing it's been 5 years. She's happy. He's happy. They care. Yeah. And that's one thing I do. I think the entire reason I'm okay with Terry being there, because I do like from the first time you see Terry, they establish of he was my best friend. I am just as heartbroken that he's gone.
Yeah, exactly.
I really love that line. And I love that little moment. I think they do, especially compared to so many Image comics in the time. Clearly, this is still around for a lot of reasons, but one reason is this one just, from the beginning, it is so much more apparent, had way longer legs than Wildcats or Youngblood or Bloodstrike or Savage Dragon even.
Which, believe me, I'm actually a pretty big Wildcats fan. I've read quite a bit of Wildcats, and I love Savage Dragon. There's a lot in those Savage Dragon issues, the initial 20 or 30 Savage Dragon issues that I think are pretty fantastic. But yeah, you're right. There's definitely, pardon the pun, there's a little bit of magic here.
Yeah,
there's a little bit of magic going on.
You can have you really have that sense of, hey, I can see why this legitimately for a while kind of changed the trajectory of an entire industry, and you can you can feel it for a while because it's that same thing. If you go back. I know I compare everything to music or wrestling, but if you go back and watch certain wrestling matches, certain music videos, certain albums you listen to, and you can see like, oh, I see how this changed things. Because if you read the world of comics before Spawn, there is a huge difference. Even you seeing the influence of Frank Miller pretty clearly, even seeing, like you mentioned, Byrne, there's still such a big difference between a book like this and anything DC or Marvel had at the time.
Well, if you want to make a movie reference, it's while it's nothing like The Matrix, it's a lot like The Matrix.
Yeah.
It just immediately kind of changed the landscape of the market that it was in. If you want to make a music reference, it Smells Like Teen Spirit.
I can see, especially that time frame. Yeah, for me, since they're back together, I'll say this is definitely the Three Cheers for Sweet Revenge of, like, you can definitely see, like, this isn't everything Mike Kim would do, but it's not Black Parade of taking the world over, but it's definitely that moment of, hey, this is going to be fucking special.
Yeah. And
this has that same feeling of, like, never mind Smells Like Teen Spirit, any of that kind of stuff of, like, holy shit, this is different. And I also love how you can slowly see how much more comfortable they get with showing more and more violence, where they start off like there's creepy scenes and some hints of major violence, but up until issue 3 there's not a ton, and issue 4 and 5 is where you start getting arms cut off, all the Billy stuff.
The hearts being ripped out. Well, there's hearts ripped out in issue 2, but it's definitely more cartoony, I think. And then when it happens to Spawn, it definitely gets a little more, I don't know, they don't look like whoopee cushions like they do in issue 2.
Overall I'm, again, pleasantly surprised at how well it holds up in a lot of ways.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And I think it's going to continue to hold up in a month when we tackle the second volume of Spawn Origins. Until then, we'll be back in 2 weeks' time. We're actually going to take a week off and then be back in 2 weeks' time with the regular Blah Blah Comics, Blah Blah Curse Words, catch up on the world of comics and movie industry news, as we so love to do.
Yes.
Thank you all so much for joining us for our first episode of Respawn. This is a project that kind of just came together out of nowhere. Through serendipity and happenstance, I happened to end up with a whole shit ton of Spawn to read, and I knew Colby was a huge fan, and it just kind of was like, I feel like doing quite possibly the biggest academic look at Spawn as a comic, and Colby was down. So hopefully all of you agree.
I hope so too. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you listen to this, if you liked it, please leave a like, leave a comment, share it, whatever you can do, because we want to keep making this show. I had a ton of fun reading this. Again, there is a lot of Spawn to do, and if you guys want us to keep talking about Spawn, we will keep talking about Spawn until we're out of words and our voices are completely sore. So please let us do that, because it only gets crazier and better from here. Again, I'm such a huge Spawn fan, and especially the next 5 volumes has some fucking gold in it.
Yeah, and some dross. I remember strongly disliking, I think, volume 3 or 4. I'll know when we get there. By the way, actually,
3 is where we get Grant Morrison.
That's true, so it's 4. I wanted to let everybody know that while volume 2, if you're reading your single issues, let me actually open that up real quick.
We run into weird legality issues.
We do. Well, it's not even legality. It's that McFarlane made a handshake agreement with Dave Sim that issue would never be reprinted. So in Spawn Origins Collection Volume 2, you're looking at issues 7 through 9, and then 11 through 14. Colby and I both own issue 10, the Cerebus guest starring issue. So we are actually going to review that issue as well. It is something in both of our collections. We'll talk about that issue when we get there. If you do not have access to the Spawn issue 10, it's pretty cheap. Most comic stores have a copy for probably around $3. If you don't want to spend money on it, that's totally fine. I understand. Just know that Cerebus shows up for an issue, and we'll talk about it. But we are going to talk about issues 7 through 14 complete.
One thing we should mention, 7 through 14, that means we have Alan Moore, Frank Miller. I love that on the back of at least the physical edition does not mention Neil Gaiman, but Neil Gaiman.
That's hilarious.
It literally has featuring hyper detailed art and stories by Spawn creator Todd McFarlane and collaborations with industry giants and legends such as Alan Moore and Frank Miller.
That's amazing. That's such a pissy little shit thing to do, but also I totally understand why he's being a pissy little shit about it. We should say social media stuff real quick. Even though this is Respawn, this is a extension of the Blah Blah Comics, Blah Blah Curse Words podcast, which is presented by the Night Nerd, I should also point out. You can find us at facebook.com/blah blah podcast. You can shoot us an email at blahblahpodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter, where I am at blah blah pod.
I'm at HellhoundF5, and I do apologize in advance because everything on my Twitter right now is just My Chemical Romance stuff, so apologize, but not sorry.
I'm shocked, I say. Again, thank you all so much for listening. Join us in a couple of weeks for another Blah Blah, and in another month for even more Spawn.
Yeah, hit that outro.